Snow was falling when a billionaire stopped his car. Under the flickering streetlights, an 8-year-old girl was selling candy to save her younger brother's life. A promise was made that night. By the next morning, 3 lives had been changed forever. Snow drifted through Boston like quiet ash, soft but relentless, swallowing sound and color. Streetlights blurred into pale halos, and the city seemed to hold its breath beneath the storm. A black sedan rolled to a stop near an empty intersection. The engine cut. Silence rushed in. Graham Voss, 41, stepped out into the cold. His coat collar was turned high, but the wind still found its way in. His breath rose in white clouds, then vanished. Another late meeting. Another room full of polished voices and lifeless numbers. He had closed the deal, shaken the hands, worn the smile. None of it followed him into the snow. He headed toward a corner cafe, the last place still glowing on the block, hoping heat and caffeine might quiet the noise inside his head. Halfway there, something made him slow. A street lamp flickered. Beneath it sat a little girl. She was small knees drawn to her chest, shoes darkened by slush. Beside her rested a worn cardboard box. Inside, neatly arranged, despite the storm, were lollipops, bright colors against the white night. In her arms, wrapped in a thin blanket, lay a baby. Graham stopped walking. The girl couldn't have been more than 8. Snow clung to her hair, melting down cheeks flushed red from the cold. She looked up at him, eyes steady but tired, far too tired for someone her age. "Candy for $1, sir," she said. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from the cold. Her lips were faintly blue. She glanced down at the baby, tightening her grip. "We need medicine," she added quietly. "My brother can't breathe right." The words struck harder than the wind. Graham felt something inside him pause, like the world had shifted just slightly under his feet. Graham crouched slowly, his shoes sinking into the snow. For the first time in years, he didn't feel tall. He felt clumsy, unprepared. "How long have you been sitting here?" he asked gently. The girl didn't answer right away. Her arms tightened around the baby as if the cold itself might steal him away. Graham followed her gaze. The baby's chest rose unevenly beneath the blanket. Each breath was shallow, followed by a weak, rattling cough that sounded wrong, too thin, too fragile. Graham's jaw clenched. "What's his name?" he asked. "Cal," she said. "He's 10 months. Her voice was calm, practiced, like she had learned not to panic. "And yours, Lena." Snowflakes settled on her lashes. She didn't brush them away. "Where's your mom?" Lena, Graham asked carefully. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "She's gone." Just one word. No explanation. No drama. "It's just us now." She added, eyes never leaving the baby. Graham noticed her hands, raw red, trembling. He noticed the blanket too thin. The candy box neatly arranged like dignity mattered even here. A memory surged up without warning. A hospital corridor. Harsh lights. A phone buzzing in his pocket while someone he loved waited for him to choose them over work. He swallowed hard. Lena shifted slightly, shielding Cal from the wind with her body. "People don't stop," she said quietly. "They just walk faster." Graham looked away. He had been one of them. Graham reached for his wallet out of instinct, then stopped. Money felt small. Wrong. Like trying to patch a sinking ship with paper. He looked at the candy box instead. "Put the candy away, Lena," he said softly. She hesitated, suspicion flickering in her eyes. Hope was dangerous. She had learned that early. "I'll get your brother help," Graham continued. "Right now." Her breath caught. You will?" she asked. He nodded. No speeches, no conditions. "Yes." Graham slipped off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was too big, hanging past her knees, but warmth flooded her instantly. She stiffened in surprise, then slowly relaxed, clutching the fabric like it might disappear. He carefully lifted Cal, supporting the baby's head, feeling how light he was. Too light. Stay close to me, Graham said. Don't let go. Lena stood wobbling slightly, then followed him toward the car, barefoot feet sinking into snow. She kept one hand gripping the coat, the other hovering protectively near Cal. Inside the car, the heater roared to life. Warm air rushed over them. Cal let out a faint sound, almost a whimper. Lena leaned closer, eyes locked on his face. What's your brother's full name? Graham asked as he started the engine. Cal Bennett, she said. He doesn't like the cold. Graham pulled into the street, tires cutting through slush. You're safe now, he said, more to himself than to her. Lena's eyes filled with tears she had been holding back all night. She whispered, "Thank you." Graham didn't answer, because deep down he knew this wasn't just about saving a child. It was about keeping a promise he had broken long ago and refusing to break another. The heater kicked on with a low hum, pushing warm air into the car like a gentle hand. It didn't feel warm enough. Not for Lena's shaking shoulders. Not for Cal's shallow breathing. Not for the panic crawling up Graham's spine. Graham pulled away from the curb and drove into the storm. Snow skated across the windshield. The wipers fought in steady rhythm, a metronome counting down moments he couldn't afford to lose. Lena sat rigid in the passenger seat, still wrapped in Graham's coat. The sleeves covered her hands, so she held them close to Cal's blanket, as if warmth could be pressed into him by sheer will. Her eyes never left her brother's face. She didn't look at the dashboard lights. She didn't look at Graham. She watched Cal breathe like she was memorizing it. Graham tried to keep his voice calm. How long has he been like this? Lena swallowed. 2 days. He coughed a lot. Then he started sounding worse. She hesitated, searching for the right words. Tonight he wouldn't stop crying, and then he got quiet. That's when Her voice broke and she tightened her grip on the blanket. That's when I went outside. Graham's hands tightened on the wheel. Quiet. That word hit like a warning bell. They approached an intersection. The light turned red. Graham braked, chest tightening as if the city itself had decided to test him. The seconds felt cruel. He stared at the cross street, empty, useless, then glanced at Lena. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She just sat there with the kind of focus adults usually lost before they reached adulthood. Where were you staying? He asked. Lena's gaze flickered toward the window. An old store, the back room, the roof leaks. Her voice turned flatter as if describing weather. We tried to stay warm. The light turned green. Graham accelerated, tires sliding slightly before catching. He didn't swear. He didn't panic out loud. He just drove like every inch of road mattered. Another red light. Graham's jaw clenched. He could feel the old part of himself, the man who controlled everything, thrashing against a reality he couldn't negotiate with. You can't outsmart snow. You can't bargain with oxygen. A faint sound rose from Cal, small, strained, not loud enough to be called a cry. Lena leaned closer, whispering into the blanket. It's okay, Cal. Stay with me. Something in Graham's chest twisted. Boardrooms, penthouse windows, the cold glow of success. None of it mattered, not compared to a child whispering life into her baby brother. The hospital finally appeared ahead, lights glowing through the storm like a lighthouse breaking through fog. Graham's breath came hard. We're here, he said. Lena didn't respond. She only pressed closer, as if she could carry Cal across the last stretch with her heartbeat alone. Graham parked crooked under the emergency awning. He barely felt the cold when he stepped out, only urgency, sharp and clean. Snow hit his face like needles, but he didn't flinch. He cradled Cal carefully, supporting the baby's head, the way he'd seen nurses do. Lena scrambled out behind him, swallowed by the coat, her small boots slipping on wet pavement. She moved fast anyway. Automatic doors slid open. Warm air and bright light rushed out. The smell, clean, sterile, hit Graham like a memory. "Help," he called, voice louder than he meant. "He can't breathe right." A nurse appeared instantly, then another. Gloves. A quick assessment. Calm voices that didn't waste words. "Okay, sir, bring him here." "How old?" 10 months, Graham said. "His name is Cal." Lena hovered behind him like a shadow with a heartbeat. Her eyes were huge, fixed on the nurse's hands. A nurse knelt to Lena's level, her tone gentle. "Sweetie, what's your name, Lena?" she whispered. "You're doing great," the nurse said. "We're going to help your brother now." They took Cal carefully, professionally, moving fast without looking frantic. The nurses disappeared through a set of swinging doors, and then the doors closed. Lena stopped breathing for a second. Not literally, but in the way a body freezes when it thinks hope might be taken away. She stood perfectly still, staring at the hallway, as if she could keep it open with her gaze. Graham turned toward her and dropped to one knee. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." She didn't. Her hands trembled inside the long sleeves of his coat. She swallowed hard. "They took him. They're helping him," Graham replied, keeping his voice steady even as his heart hammered. "That's what we want." Lena finally looked up. Her eyes were red, not from tears, but from holding them back. "You promise?" she asked. The question hit Graham like an accusation from the universe. Promises. He had made one before years ago, standing in another hospital telling someone he loved that he'd be there, that he'd slow down, that work could wait. Work hadn't waited. Time hadn't either. Graham felt the weight of that old failure press into his lungs. But Lena wasn't asking for the past. She was asking for now. He nodded, slow and certain. "I promise I'll stay right here with you, and we'll get answers. Together." Her lips parted slightly. She didn't fully believe him, she couldn't afford to, but she leaned a fraction closer as if his certainty was a railing she could hold. A receptionist approached with a clipboard. "Sir, I need some information." Graham didn't look away from Lena. "Whatever you need," he said, voice controlled. "Just, please help that baby." The receptionist softened. "They are." Lena's shoulders dropped a millimeter like a tight knot loosening. Graham stayed kneeling beside her, steady as stone, while the storm raged outside, and a child waited inside for her entire world to come back. The waiting room was too bright and not bright enough. Fluorescent lights made everything look pale, people's faces, the tile floor, the stale cup of coffee abandoned on a table. A TV played silently in the corner, captions rolling under a news anchor's moving mouth. No one watched. Lena sat on the edge of a chair, feet dangling, hands hidden inside the coat sleeves like she was afraid to touch anything and break the spell of help. She stared at the corridor where Cal had disappeared. She didn't blink often. Graham sat across from her, elbows on his knees, trying to make himself smaller. In his world, he commanded rooms. He closed deals with a glance. He spoke and people listened. Here, none of that mattered. Here he was, just a man sitting across from a child who had learned how to be brave because no one else had the time. Minutes passed in thick silence. Graham tried a gentle question. "When did your brother start struggling to breathe?" Lena's answer came fast, rehearsed. 2 nights ago. Mom used to take us to a clinic when we got sick, but she stopped. Her throat tightened. "Mom isn't here." Graham nodded once, careful not to push. "Where have you been sleeping?" Lena's eyes flicked down. "An old building, used to be a store. The back room smells like dust." She swallowed. "The roof leaks when it snows." A pause. Then quieter. "It gets really cold." Graham's chest tightened. He pictured her under that street lamp, clutching a candy box like a life raft. He pictured the people who had walked past. He pictured himself before tonight, walking past other versions of Lena without seeing them. Lena spoke again, not accusing, just stating fact. People don't look. They just walk faster. Graham looked away. Shame rose sharp and clean. I've done that, he admitted. Lena didn't react like a child impressed by honesty. She reacted like a child who'd heard excuses before. She simply returned her gaze to the hallway where reality lived. Finally, footsteps. A nurse appeared holding a clipboard. Graham stood immediately. How is he? The nurse's expression softened. Cal is stable. He's on oxygen and medication. We're watching him closely. Lena's shoulders released in a trembling exhale like she'd been holding her breath since the street lamp. Can I see him? Lena asked, voice small. In a few minutes, the nurse said. He's resting. Graham nodded. Whatever it costs. The nurse cut him off gently, not unkind. Right now he needs calm and warmth. We're doing everything we can. As the nurse walked away, Lena turned to Graham slowly, like the motion itself required courage. You really helped us, she whispered. No one ever stopped before. Graham's voice came rough. Maybe I should have stopped a long time ago. Lena stared at him, studying his face like she was trying to decide if he was real. And Graham realized the hardest part wasn't paying a hospital bill. It was earning the right to be trusted by someone who had every reason not to. The waiting room door opened again, softer this time. A woman in a white coat stepped out, clipboard held close to her chest. Her movements were calm, practiced someone who had learned how to carry heavy news without letting it crush the people waiting for it. I'm Dr. Priya Sato, she said, offering a small nod to Graham before turning her attention to Lena. You must be Cal's sister. Lena stood so fast, the chair scraped against the floor. Is he okay, doctor? Sato knelt slightly so they were closer to eye level. He's stable, she said clearly. That means he's breathing with support, and the medicine is working. Lena's breath left her in a shaky rush. She pressed a hand to her chest, like she'd been holding her heart in place. What was wrong with him? Graham asked. Cal has a chest infection, Dr. Sato explained. He's also dehydrated and underweight. He needs warmth fluids and steady care. We've started antibiotics, and he's responding. Lena's voice trembled. Will he be in pain? Dr. Sato shook her head. He's resting now. He's not in pain. Graham felt tension he hadn't known was there begin to loosen. He nodded slowly. Whatever he needs, I'll cover it. Dr. Sato studied him for a moment, weighing tone more than words. Then she nodded. That helps. Thank you. She turned back to Lena. You did the right thing bringing him here. Lena looked down, unsure how to accept praise. I just didn't want him to stop breathing. That's exactly why he's still here, Dr. Sato said gently. A nurse appeared beside them. She can see him now. Lena's eyes snapped up. Really? Yes, the nurse smiled. But only for a minute. He needs rest. Lena didn't hesitate. She moved toward the hallway, then stopped and looked back at Graham. For the first time, she didn't look afraid. Can he come too? She asked. Dr. Sato nodded. Yes. As they walked down the corridor, Graham noticed Lena's steps were lighter, though her shoulders were still tight. Hope had entered the room, but fear hadn't left yet. At the door, the nurse paused. He's small, she warned softly. Just be gentle. Lena nodded like this was a promise she had already been keeping her whole life. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of machines. Cal lay in the crib beneath a white blanket, a small tube near his nose, his chest rising in a slow, steady rhythm. He looked impossibly tiny, more fragile than any child Graham had ever seen. Lena stepped forward carefully, as if afraid the floor might creak too loudly. She reached out and touched Cal's hand with the tip of one finger. He's warm, she whispered. The word broke her voice. Graham stayed near the door, giving her space. He watched her face, how her eyes softened, how her shoulders finally dropped. This wasn't relief. This was survival loosening its grip. A nurse adjusted the blanket and spoke quietly. He's doing well. Try not to wake him. Lena nodded, then turned to Graham. Her eyes shone with something fragile and bright. He's really breathing. Graham swallowed. Yeah, he is. The nurse left them alone for a moment. Silence filled the room, thick but gentle. And then memory crashed into Graham without warning. Another hospital. Years ago. Different lights. Different machines. His wife's hand in his thin and cold. His phone buzzing with emails marked urgent. He had told himself he'd come back after one more call. He hadn't made it in time. Graham's chest tightened. His vision blurred. He turned slightly away, pressing a hand to the wall to steady himself. Lena noticed. You okay? She asked softly. Graham took a slow breath. Yeah, just remembering something. Lena nodded like she understood too well. I remember lots of things I don't want to. They stood there together, two people carrying loss in very different bodies. Lena climbed carefully onto the chair beside the crib. Her head bobbed slightly as exhaustion finally caught up with her. She fought it, blinking hard. I don't want to sleep, she murmured. What if he wakes up? Graham moved closer. I'll stay, he said. I won't let anything happen. She studied his face, searching for cracks. Finding none, she nodded. Her eyes closed slowly. One hand stayed wrapped around Cal's tiny fingers. Within minutes, Lena was asleep, breathing deep, trusting completely. Graham sat down beside her. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. The same coat he'd given her on the street, still hanging loose. Snow fell quietly outside the window. For the first time in years, Graham didn't feel the urge to run from a hospital. The night stretched on, measured in soft beeps and the slow rhythm of breathing. Graham didn't move. He sat beside the crib, listening, counting each rise and fall of Cal's chest, like it was something sacred. Lena slept, curled in the chair, her hand never leaving her brother's. Her face relaxed and sleep looked younger, like the child she should have been all along. A nurse came in once to check vitals. She paused when she saw Graham still there. You don't have to stay, she said quietly. We'll watch him. Graham shook his head. I know. But I'm staying anyway. The nurse nodded. She had seen this kind of resolve before. Not often, but enough to recognize it. Hours passed. The storm outside eased, snow falling softer almost apologetically. Boston lay muted beneath white. Graham's thoughts wandered to the life he had built. Glass offices, quiet penthouse rooms, dinners eaten alone. He had believed isolation was peace. He had been wrong. Near dawn, Cal stirred. A small cough escaped him, weaker than before. Lena woke instantly, eyes wide, heart racing. Cal Graham leaned forward. Hey, buddy, he whispered, voice steady. A nurse appeared, calm and quick. She checked the monitor, adjusted. The tubing smiled. He's okay. That's normal. Lena exhaled so hard her shoulders shook. She pressed her forehead lightly to the crib rail. I'm here, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. Graham watched her, something breaking open in his chest. This was love without conditions, without safety nets. Morning light crept through the window, pale and forgiving. The city looked different in daylight, cleaner, quieter. Dr. Sato returned, smiling softly. The antibiotics are working, she said. He's improving. Lena looked at Graham, tears finally spilling over. Thank you. He shook his head gently. You did this, he said. You saved him. She frowned, confused. I just sold candy. No, Graham said. You didn't give up. Lena considered that, then nodded slowly, like she was filing the thought away for later, something to hold on to when things got hard again. As the sun rose higher, Graham realized something he hadn't expected. This night, cold, frightening, exhausting, had quietly rewritten his life. And he wasn't afraid of what came next. 3 days passed in hospital time, slow humming measured by medication schedules and soft footsteps in the hallway. Cal's color returned little by little. His breathing was still uneven, but no longer frightening. Each day, Lena sat closer to his crib, as if proximity alone could guard him from the world. On the third morning, a nurse entered with a warm smile. "Cal's ready to go home," she said. Lena froze. "Home, yes." The nurse nodded. "He'll still need medicine and follow-up visits, but he's strong enough now." Lena looked down at Cal, then up at Graham, panic and relief tangled together. She didn't know which feeling to trust. Graham stood as Dr. Sato arrived with discharge papers. "He'll need warmth, consistent meals, and rest," the doctor said. "Most important, he needs stability." Graham didn't hesitate. "He'll have all of that." The nurse handed him the clipboard. "Relationship to the patient." Graham paused, pen hovering over the page. For a moment the hospital went quiet again. He felt Lena watching him, careful, alert, ready to pull away if the ground shifted. "Not yet," Graham said quietly. Then he signed. Lena didn't ask what it meant. She just nodded as if she understood that some things were still becoming. Outside, the snow had melted into gray slush. The city had woken back up, horns, footsteps, life moving on. Graham opened the car door and helped Lena buckle Cal into the seat. His movements careful, deliberate. "You don't have to help us anymore," Lena said suddenly. "We can take the bus." Graham shook his head. "You're not taking the bus, then?" "Where are we going?" she asked. He met her eyes in the mirror. Somewhere warm. The drive was quiet. Lena watched the city pass by, hand resting protectively over Cal's blanket. Graham glanced at them again and again, like he was afraid they might disappear if he didn't. They had learned not to expect kindness. Graham had learned what it cost to ignore it. The gate opened silently as they pulled into the driveway. Lena stared out the window, her mouth parting slightly. The house sat on the hill like something unreal, glass and wood glowing softly against the winter sky. Snow had been cleared from the path, revealing stone beneath. "You live here," Lena whispered. "Yes," Graham replied. "It's big. It's huge," she said, not accusing, just amazed. "It's been too big for a long time," he admitted. Inside, warmth wrapped around them instantly. The fireplace flickered in the living room, casting soft shadows on high walls. Lena carried Cal inside carefully, setting him on the couch, as if afraid the space might reject him. She looked around, slowly, paintings, shelves of books, quiet rooms that felt like they were holding their breath. "You must be hungry," Graham said. Lena nodded, shy now that survival wasn't the only thing on her mind. Graham called out. Ms. Hart footsteps approached. Delia Hart, silver-haired and steady-eyed, appeared in the doorway. She took one look at Lena and Cal, then at Graham. No questions. No shock. "I'll make soup," she said simply. Within minutes, the house filled with the smell of warmth, broth, bread, something alive. Lena ate slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure permission would last. Cal slept beside her, his chest rising calm and steady. Graham watched from across the table. He had eaten hundreds of meals alone. None of them had sounded like this: soft spoons, quiet breathing, life happening. After she finished, Lena looked up. "Why are you helping us?" Graham leaned back. "Because someone should have helped me once." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway. That night, Graham showed her the guest room. Clean sheets, soft light, safety. "If you need anything," he said, "I'm right down the hall." Lena hesitated, then whispered, "Good night, Graham." When he turned off the light, the house no longer felt empty. Days passed quietly. Not perfect, just safe. Lena followed Delia through the kitchen, learning how to stir soup without spilling, how to fold towels just right. She drew pictures on scrap paper and left them on Graham's desk without saying anything. Cal grew stronger. His laughter echoed through rooms that had forgotten what laughter sounded like. Graham started waking earlier, coming home sooner. Work no longer filled every space inside him. Sometimes he came home to find Lena reading to Cal on the couch, her finger tracing words she barely knew yet. One evening she ran to the door holding a drawing. A man, a girl, a baby, snow falling, a small box of candy. At the bottom, one word was written carefully, home. Graham placed the drawing on his desk and never moved it again. Later, Lena asked, "Can we go back to my mom's place?" Graham nodded. "Whenever you're ready." That night, he stood at the window long after the children had fallen asleep. The city lights stretched endlessly below, but none of it mattered now. The sound of quiet breathing down the hall was enough. For the first time in years, Graham wasn't afraid of staying in one place. He was afraid of leaving it. They returned on a quiet afternoon when the sky was pale and undecided. The old building stood where Lena remembered it, smaller than fear had made it, sadder than time had allowed. The sign above the door was half gone. The windows were clouded with dust. Graham parked across the street and waited. He didn't rush her. Some doors had to be opened slowly. Lena stepped out first, Cal bundled against her chest. She walked with purpose, now not urgency like someone revisiting a memory rather than escaping it. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and forgotten things. Light leaked through cracks in the ceiling. "This was the back room," Lena said, pointing. "We slept there." Graham followed, heart heavy. The room was bare except for a thin blanket on the floor and a cracked photo frame near the wall. Lena knelt and picked it up carefully. In the photo, a young woman smiled at the camera holding a baby in her arms. She looked tired, but warm. Real. "This was Mom," Lena said softly, "before Cal got sick." Graham crouched beside her. "She looks kind." "She was," Lena said. "She always said things would get better, even when they weren't." Silence filled the room, not empty, full. Graham felt the weight of a life lived quietly, bravely, without witnesses. Lena stood and held the photo out to him. "You can have this. You helped us." Like she would have. Graham shook his head gently. "No. Keep it. She belongs with you." Lena nodded, slipping the photo into her coat pocket like something precious. As they walked back out, snow began to fall again, light, slow, unthreatening. Graham locked the car and looked down at her. "You don't belong in places like that," he said. "You and Cal deserve more." Lena looked up, puzzled. "More than what?" "More than surviving," Graham replied. "You deserve a family." She studied his face carefully, as if weighing every word. Then she said simply, "I think we already have one." Graham didn't answer. He couldn't. The words lodged in his chest and stayed there. The drive home was quiet. Snow brushed the windshield like soft fingers. Lena watched the road, one hand resting over Cal's blanket, steady and sure. Graham's thoughts raced not forward, but inward. He had spent years building walls strong enough to keep pain out. He hadn't realized they also kept everything else away. That night, after the children slept, Graham stood alone in his study. Lena's drawing sat on his desk. The word home stared back at him. He picked up the phone. His lawyer answered groggily. "Graham, I need help," Graham said. "No preamble, no pride. The right kind. For 2 kids. There was a pause. Then professionalism. "Tell me everything." Graham did. He didn't soften the truth or dramatize it. He spoke about safety, stability, legal protection, counseling, school, doctors, everything that mattered. "We'll do it by the book," the lawyer said firmly. "No shortcuts," good Graham replied. "They deserve better than shortcuts." He hung up and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Fear crept in, not of responsibility, but of losing them, of becoming something they depended on, and failing. A soft sound came from the hallway. Lena stood there wrapped in a blanket. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "The house is too quiet." Graham opened his arms. "Come here." She sat beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. The weight was light. The trust was not. Do you ever miss being alone? She asked. He smiled faintly. Not once. She yawned. Will everything stay like this? Graham looked down at her. Nothing stays the same forever, he said gently. But this will always be home. She hesitated. Promise? He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Promise. Lena closed her eyes, the last of her fear easing away. And in that quiet room, Graham realized the world had already shifted. Weeks passed. Paperwork, home visits, gentle questions asked by careful professionals who wanted the right things for the right reasons. Lena adjusted faster than Graham expected. She smiled more. She slept through the night. Cal grew stronger by the day, his laughter filling spaces Graham hadn't known were empty. One morning, sunlight poured through the living room windows. Lena stood on a stool carefully pouring cereal. Milk sloshed, nearly spilling. I've got it, she said quickly. Graham steadied the bowl. Team effort. She grinned. Later that afternoon, a final envelope arrived. Graham held it longer than necessary before opening it. Inside were the last documents. Signed, approved, done. Delia watched from the doorway, quiet but proud. That evening, Graham sat by the fireplace with the folder on his lap. Lena wandered in, curious. Cal toddled behind her with a stuffed bear. What's that? Lena asked. Graham closed the folder. Something that makes sure no one can ever take you away. Lena frowned. But we already belong here. He nodded. Now the world agrees. She climbed onto the couch beside him, leaning into his side. Cal climbed too clumsy and determined. Graham wrapped an arm around both of them. For years his life had been defined by what he built. Now it was defined by who stayed. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, harmless. Inside, the house was warm. And for the first time, Graham Voss didn't feel like a man who had everything. He felt like a man who finally had enough. The house changed without anyone saying it out loud. It wasn't the furniture or the light. It was the sound. Morning footsteps. Soft laughter drifting down the hallway. The clatter of a spoon dropped on the floor. The kind of noise that didn't ask permission, it simply belonged. Graham noticed it most in the early hours. He used to wake before dawn, mind already racing toward work. Now he woke to something else. A baby's soft babble, Lena humming to herself as she padded across the kitchen floor in socks too big for her feet. Cal was stronger every day. He learned to pull himself up by gripping the couch, his face set in fierce concentration. When he fell, he laughed instead of crying. Lena cheered like he had just won something important. Did you see that she called to Graham one morning? Graham lowered his laptop and smiled. I did. Work still existed. Meetings still waited. But they no longer filled every corner of him. He left earlier, came home sooner. The house seemed to reward him for it, warming around him like it approved of the choice. One afternoon, Lena asked if she could help cook dinner. Delia handed her a spoon and watched closely. Lena stirred carefully, serious as if performing surgery. I don't want to mess it up, she said. You won't, Delia replied. You're paying attention. That's what matters. Later, while Cal napped, Lena sat at the dining table doing homework. She paused, pencil hovering. Graham, she asked. Yes, is it okay if I call you? Dad. The word fell gently, not demanding. Curious. Testing the air. Graham's breath caught. He didn't answer right away, not because he didn't want it, but because the moment deserved care. If that feels right to you, he said softly, then it feels right to me. Lena nodded, relief flickering across her face. She returned to her homework satisfied. Graham turned toward the window, blinking hard. The house had learned to breathe, and so had he. Winter loosened its grip slowly. Snow melted into clear water along the edges of the driveway. The garden began to show hints of green beneath the cold. One Saturday morning, Graham bundled Lena and Cal into scarves and gloves. "We're building a snowman before it's gone," he announced. Lena grinned. "He's going to be huge." "He's going to be crooked," Graham corrected. Cal clapped his hands like this was the best idea he'd ever heard. They worked together in the yard, rolling snow into uneven shapes. Lena placed a carrot for the nose, stepping back to judge her work. "He looks happy," she said. Graham nodded. "He does." Snowflakes drifted lazily around them, nothing like the storm that had started it all. Lena's laughter rang clear in the cold air. Then her voice softened. "I still miss my mom sometimes." Graham knelt beside her. "I know. She would have liked it here," Lena said. "She wanted things to be calm." Graham smiled gently. "She sounds very wise?" Lena nodded. "She told me being kind matters, even when it's hard." They stood together, the snowman between them, the past and present quietly touching. That evening, Graham sat alone in his study. The adoption folder lay open on the desk. Everything was final now, official in ink and seal. He thought of the night he'd found Lena under the street lamp, the candy box, the blue lips, the promise he had made without knowing how far it would carry him. A soft knock came at the door. Lena peeked in, holding Cal's stuffed bear. "Can we say goodnight together?" Graham smiled. "Of course." He tucked Cal into his crib, then Lena into her bed beside it. She curled on her side, watching her brother breathe. "Dad," she whispered. "Yes, you kept your promise." Graham's chest tightened. "So did you." Lena smiled already, drifting toward sleep. The promise had been kept not just once, but every day since. Late that night, after the house had gone quiet, Graham stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched out below him, lights steady beneath a clear sky. The wind was cold, but it no longer felt sharp. He thought of his wife, of the years he had spent chasing deadlines instead of moments. He thought of Lena's mother holding her children together with sheer will and love. And then he thought of the word Lena had written in careful letters. Home. A small sound made him turn. Lena stood in the doorway wrapped in a blanket. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "The wind's loud." Graham opened his arms. "Come here." She stepped close, resting her head against his chest. He felt her breathe slow and steady. "Do you think things will ever get bad again?" she asked. He considered the question carefully. "Life gets hard sometimes," he said honestly. "But you won't face it alone." She nodded, accepting that truth. They stood there for a moment, sharing the quiet. "I like it here," Lena whispered. "So do I," Graham replied. He carried her back to bed and tucked her in beside Cal. Both children slept peacefully, faces relaxed, safe. Graham lingered in the doorway, watching them. Two lives that had once been lost in the cold, now warm and held. Outside, the last traces of winter faded. Inside, there was peace. Not the silence he once called success, but something deeper. Something earned. Graham turned off the light and smiled. Tomorrow would bring noise, work, and the rush of the world. But tonight, there was only home. Spring arrived quietly, like it didn't want to disturb what had finally settled. The last piles of snow disappeared from the edges of the street, replaced by thin lines of green pushing through the soil. With spring came attention. At first it was small things. A teacher calling to say Lena was doing well in class, exceptionally well actually. A pediatric nurse praising Cal's steady progress. Neighbors offering polite smiles instead of curious stares. Then came the questions. "Are they your children?" someone asked at a fundraiser Graham attended for the first time in years. He didn't hesitate. Yes. The word felt solid. Earned. At home, Lena adjusted to school with cautious confidence. She still packed her backpack the night before, double-checking everything, as if prepared for the world to change its mind. Graham noticed and gently reminded her that mornings didn't have to be rushed anymore. "They won't forget you," he said once, kneeling to zip her jacket. "You don't have to disappear to be safe." Lena thought about that for a long moment. Then she nodded. Cal took his first steps on a Tuesday afternoon. Delia cried. Lena screamed. Graham laughed so hard he had to sit down. "Did you see that?" Lena shouted. "He walked to you." Graham scooped Cal up, heart pounding. "I saw," he said. "I saw everything." That night, Lena sat at the dining table, drawing again. This time she added more details: trees, a sun, 3 figures holding hands. Graham watched from the doorway. "What are you making?" She looked up. "It's us. But later." "Later," he asked. "When things are boring," she said seriously. "So we remember this part." Something tightened in Graham's chest. The world outside continued its rush, markets rising and falling, news cycling endlessly. But inside the house, time moved differently now. It paused. It waited. It paid attention. One evening, as Graham tucked Lena into bed, she asked quietly, "Do you think Mom knows we're okay?" Graham didn't rush his answer. "I think," he said gently, "she hoped you would be." Lena smiled, comforted by the thought. As Graham turned off the light, he realized the world had noticed their existence, but it no longer defined it. They were no longer surviving in the margins. They were living in the center of something real. The house held stories now. Not the kind written down or framed, but the kind woven into routines. Saturday pancakes. Shoes kicked off by the door. Cal's toys migrating slowly from room to room like they belonged everywhere. Graham found himself changing too. He declined meetings without guilt, took calls from the school without irritation, learned how to listen without fixing. One evening, he sat with Lena at the kitchen table helping her practice reading. She stumbled over a word and frowned. "I'm not good at this," she said. Graham shook his head. "You're learning. That's different." She considered that. "Okay," she said, trying again. Later, when the house was quiet, Graham opened a small wooden box he kept in his desk. Inside was Lena's first drawing, the one with the candy box and the word home. He added another item beside it, a folded copy of the adoption certificate. Not as proof, as memory. A soft knock came at the door. Lena peeked in, holding a blanket. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. "Always." She climbed onto the chair beside him, resting her head on his arm. "Do you think things will ever go back to how they were?" she asked. Graham knew what she meant. The cold, the street lamp, the fear. "No," he said gently, "because we're not the same people anymore." She nodded, satisfied. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the windows. It sounded nothing like the snow. Graham carried Lena back to bed and tucked her in. Cal slept peacefully, one hand curled around the edge of his blanket. Graham stood there longer than necessary, watching them breathe. 2 children who had once waited in the cold, now waiting only for morning. As he turned off the light, Graham understood something simple and unshakable. Some things change your life. Others become your life. And some are what stay. The night was quiet in a way Graham had never known before. Not the hollow quiet of empty rooms or the artificial calm of glass towers after midnight, but a living quiet. One that breathed. One that held warmth instead of echo. He stood by the window, watching the city lights stretch across the dark like a patient constellation. Somewhere below, traffic moved. Somewhere far away, life rushed on. None of it felt urgent anymore. Behind him, the house rested. From down the hall came the soft rhythm of sleep, 2 different breaths, perfectly out of sync, yet somehow balanced. Cal's tiny exhale. Lena's slower, steadier one. Graham listened the way he once listened to market reports, except this mattered. He thought of the night it had all begun. The street lamp, the falling snow. A small girl with a box of candy and a voice that shook but didn't break. "Candy for $1, sir. We need medicine." He had believed back then that he was stepping in to save a life. He hadn't understood that he was being invited into one. A faint sound pulled him from his thoughts. Bare feet padded softly across the floor. Lina's voice whispered from the doorway. He turned, smiling immediately. Couldn't sleep? She shook her head, wrapped in her blanket like a cocoon. The wind sounds different tonight. He opened his arms. Come here. She crossed the room and leaned into him without hesitation, her head fitting easily against his chest, as if it had always belonged there. Graham rested his chin lightly against her hair. It doesn't sound scary, she said after a moment. Just loud. That's because you're safe, he replied. She tilted her head up, studying his face with that careful seriousness she still carried sometimes. Do you ever think about that night all the time? Graham admitted. She nodded. Me too. But it doesn't hurt as much anymore. They stood there together, listening to the wind fade into nothing more than background noise. After a while, Lina yawned. Will things always be good? Graham didn't rush his answer. He had learned not to make promises that reality couldn't keep. Life won't always be easy, he said gently. But you'll always have someone to hold your hand through it. She considered that. Even when I'm big, especially then. She smiled, satisfied. Okay. Graham carried her back to bed, moving carefully so she wouldn't wake Cal. He tucked her in, pulling the blanket up to her shoulders, the same way he had done 100 times now. Before he turned away, Lina reached out and caught his sleeve. You promised, she said sleepily. He leaned down. I did. And you kept it. Yes, he whispered. I will. Her hand loosened, drifting back to the pillow. Within seconds, she was asleep again, her breathing deep and calm. Graham stayed there watching both children for a long moment. Two lives that had once waited in the cold, unsure if anyone would stop. Now they waited for nothing at all. He turned off the light and closed the door softly behind him. Outside, the city continued to shine. Inside, the house held something stronger than light. It held a promise no longer spoken, no longer fragile. A promise that had become a home. And for the first time in his life, Graham Voss knew exactly where he belonged. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.